Shantanu.
Shantanu. Yeah.
Oh, I said we could start with Lucio.
Oh, Lucio.
Okay, no problem. No problem.
Okay.
Okay.
Coming. Just share the screen. Voila. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so good. Well, let's start from the definitions, because in this chapter, Bernard is, he is trying to draw the similarities, but also the differences, distinctions between social systems and network and social networks. Let's say social networks mean as networks made by social entities, made by individuals or organizations in this sense. So not necessarily what is meant by social networks now in the common language. Okay, so let's look first at the definitions. And
I hear that I think that we mainly agree it's not very productive. And so one of our goals in this endeavor is to counter that with vision and ingenuity as we work together.
Oh, that's another meeting. Go ahead.
Okay. Definitions. Definition is that a system and a network graph, so there is a graph, but basically is the same. They actually share the same definition. There is a set of points, in the case, usually in the language of graph theory or network science, or components in the case of systems science and cybernetics, connected by a set of links. And so this is precisely the same definition in both cases.
I must interrupt. Sorry, apologies for interrupting, Lucio, but that's not what I say. I say there is this this abstract language of networks, and they can be social networks if the nodes are social actors, as you say, individual.
Now we're coming to that, Bernard. Just keep okay. Waiting for a moment.
I'll keep out of it. Okay.
But this was the definition that you too provided in the book. Then you are going to make distinctions. Just wait a second.
Okay.
So my first notice is that in network theory, a point could be also disconnected. So what matters is whether it could potentially be connected. There is, I mean, I can deal with, for example, a network of companies, a trade network, and in this network, some companies could be now, in the moment that I'm doing the research, maybe are disconnected, so they are not trading anything, but they could be connected in the future according to what I think that industry or that set, that phenomenon that I'm studying is dealing with. And so this is something that is different. For example, in network analysis, I mean, networks can be defined and can be studied, even if not all points are connected in all the times of understudy. I mean, in the moment that I'm studying that. This is just take notice of this. But then there are other differences. I mean, because I will point at some questions about which I do not agree with Bernard. And so I'm just going to show in which case. So in fact, now, for instance, I ask, does it hold this property of being potentially connected, not actually connected, necessarily actually, does it all also for components in social systems definition. And Bernard argues for a negative answer because of the supposed social systems requisite of organizational closure. And so this we come to a point in which actually I disagree with Bernard, because he based its distinction and its theory of these differences between social networks and social systems on autopoiesis theory. Because actually it's just the requisite of organizational closure. But in my view, that is absolutely not necessary to make this restriction, this constraint. And this constraint anchors cybernetics to autopoiesis. And in my view, this is a conceptual suicide for the future development of cybernetics. I mean, the marriage that occurred during the 80s and 90s of cybernetics with autopoiesis, I think it was very poisoning, and it's a very dangerous marriage, because in my view, social systems are not autopoietic systems. And so joining the two things, making the two things coinciding, is a very bad outcome, in my view, for the development of cybernetics. And it's actually what Luhmann did. And so the continental sociology, especially based on German-speaking sociologists following Luhmann, I think this is something that is, it hurted a lot the discipline as a whole, because at least I can tell you that into the field that in which I work and I meet people in conferences, I mean discussions, I mean economists, and they cannot even hear the word autopoiesis. I mean, it's something that is considered totally not qualified. I mean, something that is very more similar to, let's say, a fake theory than something that is really consistent and sound. At least this is what is, I mean, not only my point of view, but what is my experience in discussions, just in open discussions. In fact, it's very, very difficult. I think I have not in mind any book or some economist that is based on autopoiesis. So, and why it's the point is that social systems are, and social networks as well, are not operationally nor organizationally, neither communicationally closed. Which is the main point of autopoiesis, that they are closed. And by the way, further, they are not topologically invariant, which is one strong, usually overlooked fundamental requisite for autopoiesis, that the topology must be invariant, because if the topology, let's even suppose that it's closed, but it's changing, it's dynamic, then the system would lose, in the jargon of autopoiesis, would lose its identity. And in these terms, each social system is always losing identity if identity is based on topological invariance. That is, on keeping the distribution. Topological invariance means that the links are distributed permanently in the same way between nodes, between points. And this is not what happens, actually, because I mean, social systems are dynamic, and they change. They change their structure, they change their operations, they are open to the external environment, and so on. And the other point is that social systems do not produce their own components. I mean, a hospital does not produce its own equipments or other materials do not produce themselves. If this idea of self-production, which is literally autopoiesis, can hold in biology, the field of cellular biology, which I don't know because I'm not a biologist. I speak as an economist and as a management scholar. And this is actually not the case of social systems. They do not produce their own components. Perhaps I wrote here, this could be the view if we consider the whole mankind, the whole planet as a social system. So taking the whole planet, okay, yes, because in that case, a hospital is just one of the components of the whole social system, planetarian social system, and is using components produced by other components. But it's not, of course, this the meaning of autopoiesis theory, and it is not sense. Then Bernard proceeds looking for the network identifications by an external observer, and I mean discusses 4 points. I think it took 5 points. And just notice here that in the third condition, he says the links may be unidirectional, or bidirectional. Okay, let's just take note for what I will say in a moment. Then he says the network may be considered to be closed. That is, if no new members may be added. This is an idea of closure just to be discussed. It's an idea of closure that is not that one usually considered by the theory of autopoiesis. Maybe it could be better said that the network may be considered stable or invariant if there is no any, let's say, turnover in or out, rather than closed. By the way, even in this respect, if we look at social systems, so there is a continuous turnover. No, let's take again an hospital or a company. There are people that are hired, some other are fired, some other go pensioned, some other. I mean, if these were actually a condition to consider the system or the network closed, is a condition that never verified because they are dynamic in this sense. Then in the fifth condition, Bernard says, it may be the case that individual social actors are members of several social networks. And this is something that I totally agree with him. It's absolutely true. But at the same time, this is exactly the reason why autopoiesis theory is inconsistent. It is totally unrealistic, just because people belonging to, let's say, a university at the same time can belong to a political party, to a trade union, to another club, to so many different social systems at the same time. And if a member of a system is belonging at the same time, is a member of other social system, so it means that that system is not closed by definition. I mean, because its members are at the same time members of different social systems. And so everything happening in that individual, everything happening in Lucio Biggiero, who belongs to University of L'Aquila, Lucio Biggiero is bringing this knowledge, is bringing this information, is bringing these behaviors, even in the other systems to which he belongs. So no closure at all. So now I mean, the constraints part of my speech is about what is my idea of the differences between system and network. In my view, it's a system is a network at the same time. So they are precisely the same thing. It's the same object. The question is only that there is a dualism. There is, in the case of a system, you can speak of systems property. And systems property, traditionally in system science, in cybernetics, is dealing with what? Is dealing with input-out relationships, anticipative feedback or posticipative feedback, observers, dependence, self-organization. These are typical classical issues in cybernetics. And it's precisely, typically, I mean, taking the system in aggregate, basically is an aggregate view. The network, when you look at the network perspective, you are looking at different properties, but different properties of the same object. So if a university is a system, is a social system, is at the same time a social network. But when you are looking at the network properties, you are focusing on different aspects. So basically, you are not looking at the system anymore as a black box. You are opening the black box. It becomes a transparent box, and you are looking at the connections inside the system. So you are looking at the internal structure. That is, you are looking at the topology, the distribution of the connections. So that's just the real difference between the two views. In one case, I wonder, okay, the university, how is interacting with the other social systems? What is its outputs? What are its inputs? And what are the capacity of managing the feedback and blah, blah, blah. When you are looking at the university in terms of networks, I'm looking at which people is connected with whom else and in which way. And I mean, it's just opening the system and looking inside. By the way, the question of recursivity was not a typical issue of network science, at least not, it was not at the beginning of network science, but it is becoming. I mean, in last 20 years, if you go and look at the network science and in the debates, the papers, I mean, they are precisely looking at the question of recursivity. Just the difference is in language. In network science, they are called cycles. Instead of recursive processes, they are called cycles. And you look at cycles, how many cycles are, how long are these cycles? There are even specific measures. For example, it's called the cyclomatic number. That is counting how many simple cycles, cycles counted only once in a network. And so, it's just becoming, and it's also our purpose to enrich network science with the discussions already made in cybernetics, to enrich network science, feeding network science with the question of self-organization and recursivity. I mean, this is something that is propositive. It could be very interesting to me. So in short, more or less, it is what we have seen for one century of physics. It is the dualism of wave particles. So what surprise? No surprise. It has been a lot of debates in physics, no, from the beginning of the 20th century on, for decades and decades. Is a particle or is a wave? Particle. At the very end, they say is a particle and is a wave. I mean, it is the same phenomenon that sometimes, and you detect it and test it as particles in some experiments and in some aspects of the phenomenon, and other times you are looking at the same phenomenon in terms of waves. And in my view, the same holds for systems and networks. They refer to precisely the same object, just emphasizing, putting in the spotlight one aspect or the other aspect. Last slide. reciprocity. Bernard says that what distinguishes social from natural or artificial networks is that social systems, in social systems, there is no reciprocity, and in others, no. And that's not true. Sorry, Bernard, but that's not true. Trade networks are directed networks. I can sell something to you, and you don't sell anything to me. So it is directed. They are directed networks. All trade networks, all ownership networks, postal networks. I can send you a postcard and you don't send it to me. So they are directed networks. There is no any necessary reciprocity. There could be, I mean, of course, some social networks are characterized by reciprocity and I mean, non-directed, and some others not. Finally, by the way, organizational charts, that is just the representation of hierarchy, is just in terms of directed networks. In fact, decisions flow from the superior to the subordinate and not vice versa. So directed networks, and they of course are social networks. Huh? Even some natural networks are reciprocal. So it's not true even the vice versa, even the reverse. That is, not only social networks can be directed, but non-social networks can be also reciprocal and undirected. So in short, this question of reciprocity doesn't make any useful distinction between social networks and non-social networks. Okay, I have
Well, thank you very much, Lucio. That came across as a very thorough, comprehensive hatchet job on my thinking. So I hope you don't mind if I'm equally blunt when I reply. Well, I'll try to be polite. Can we begin at with your first slide?
first one, this one.
Is that the word one? The system and the network share the same definitions. Well, yeah. First thing to bear in mind that it's the observer who defines, who distinguishes the system. It's the observer who models the system. Now, the observer may be a participant observer, he may be included in the system himself, it may be a member of the system or member of the network, or in the network and is languaging, if you like, or is communicating with the members. But this is the world of social, of the social systems that I'm interested in, and that is, the network. There are other systems and networks that you can use in the world of biology and physical systems, which are not the same thing. And you can also take the first order view of cybernetics, where the observer, external observer, distinguishes the system, distinguishes the components, and models them in various ways. He may abstract data in various ways, but he's not a partisan observer in the sense of communicating with the members of the network, and whatever properties is attributing to him, or once he is attributing, how he decide what they are is a kind of a separate matter. In a network theory point, well, of course, a point can be also disconnected. I mean, connections come and go. A flood comes and the roads disappear, the telegraph poles are knocked down, and 2 weeks later they're rebuilt. And 3 weeks later, there's a new suburb being constructed. So that's to me, that's just a fairly obvious point. The other components in social system, I don't argue that. what I argue for is with respect to what I define, it's also a question of definition. For me, a social system is one which involves social actors and all the properties that go with being an observing system, a second order system, a human being generally. So I'm just choosing that I prefer, I'm thinking of social systems in terms of those properties of the of participants in a collective of some sort and how we model those. And I use organizational closure in the context of closure of the relations between observers at the level of being conscious or not with each other. I'm not, but that hinges on making the distinction that Pask makes, not Luhmann, Pask makes between the psychological unities of individuals and collectives and their embodiment, where the embodiment is something biomechanical, like the bodies and the extensions, the desks, the telephones, the computers. There's all that stuff, which is obviously part of the functioning of a system, but it's the social aspects of the system, the psychological, psychosocial aspects, if you like, which make it a social system. Otherwise, it could be some sort of remote functioning robot, like a satellite or a radar system that's working autonomously and throwing data out to its operators. Not social at all, but could be modeled as a network. I'd like to see one of these chatbots modeled as a network so I can understand how the different components the different functions it has, the different components work together to produce what it produces. I've not found that yet. If anyone knows about that, please tell me. That's by the way. And it's obviously not a social system as I'm interested. Next slide, please, Lucio.
Yeah.
Okay. As I recall, I do not use the word autopoiesis in the paper, in my chapter at all. I'm following Pask here. Pask uses the term organizational closure to refer to the unities that are social, that are psychological individuals, and the processes that maintain them as autonomous wholes. And he does that with respect to as a point of respect towards Maturana, because Maturana prefers to use autopoiesis to refer to biological systems. So I'm not using that term. And if there is a human being in front of us, I would say we've got an organizational closure of the psychological individual, the person, the self, whatever you want to call it, that is autonomous there, that, as you are, Lucio, as Lucio the person, that you are embodied in a biological system, which is indeed autopoietic. And we could look at a factory system as an external observer and say, oh, well, look, we can distinguish the collective that is social and we can go and talk to them. We can also distinguish all the material components which are coming and going as part of the operations of the system. So it's just it's a different, I've got this Paskian distinction between the P individual, the M individual, and I'm using the terms organizational closure for the P individual, autopoiesis I would use for the biological theory if I was talking about biological systems, which I'm not. Okay. And I'm not anchoring cybernetics, except now I see this as a, so not operational, they're not topologically invariant. Well, if you understand the theory of autopoiesis or the theory of self-reproducing systems or the theory of organizational closure systems, you'll know that they are not topologically invariant. In fact, those concepts are concepts that emerged from the earlier generation of the 50s and 60s, used the term self-organization. for systems that evolve, as that learn and evolve and adapt. And one of the critical contributions Maturana made when he said a way of thinking about these self-organized systems is that they are autopoietic, they are self-reproducing. They're maintaining their organization, the feature of a closed organization that keeps reproducing itself. But then he distinguishes that from the structure of the system. At any moment, an autopoietic system or organization, closed system, has a structure, but that structure is not invariant. It's not topologically invariant. It changes from moment to moment. I'm moving my hand. I'm speaking. I'm an autopoietic biological system, and at that level, as I move around, the structure of my system is changing. If someone chops my arm off, my structure is seriously changed. But if I'm still alive, I'm still an autopoietic system. I'm still labeled as that body belonging to Bernard Scott. So you, in this case, have a misunderstanding of autopoiesis. The critical distinction made by Maturana is between the organization of a system, which is conserved, and the structure of a system, which is ever changing. Okay, if it changes too radically, then the organization is not conserved, and the system dies. If someone chops my heart out, I'm structurally seriously damaged to the point where I can no longer function as an autopoietic system. Okay. Okay, well, so this not producing their own components, I'm looking at social actors who are embodied, in past terms, psychological individuals or psychosocial unities. They're embodied, so there is a bodily activity going on, producing components or not components, alongside my mind, if you like, myself, is not producing anything other than changes within my personal body system, but it's bringing about changes in my personal body system, which then affect the world and grasp it, look at it, do all sorts of things, including producing components if necessary. Next slide, please. The chart. Oh, thank you. Yeah, to me, having got an act, for me, social actor, an actor is an embodied psychosocial unity. So having got that far, here come that, and we have this interesting aspect in social systems. I understand it, that an external observer can observe the behavior, and you go in and communicate with the members. The members can observe themselves. They themselves can construct their own models, their own understandings of how the system works. And there's members of maybe some members attribute to themselves consciously. Yes, I am a member of my local table tennis club. I'm a member of the ASC. But if you're behaving as an external observer and you've gone in, you're looking at data flows within a factory or in a hospital, you're not talking to the individuals or the components directly. You're modeling them, possibly using network theory, but that is not only by label is it social. You're modeling what from another perspective is a social system, but if you're modeling it like that, you're modeling as an observed system, first order system, and you're going to use your graphs and your networks and so on, and your computer simulations, your systems modeling to model the system. About that, well, this
is your text, Bernard.
Yes, yeah, I realise that. I'm commenting on your comments about my text. The next one is that, yes, I mean, this is, I mean, if you are, for example, working in an hierarchical organisation, there are restrictions on who you may communicate with. I mean, if you're a lowly private in the army, you cannot send a message to the general. You know, there are restrictions. He can send messages to you. You know, shoot that man. He's a traitor or whatever. Sending it from okay. So that's and I think that's enough to be said about that. Within hierarchical organization, there's a whole separate theory about hierarchical organizations and how you might want to model them and talk about them. And I'm quite fond of the work of what's his name? He was my professor at Brunel University. So I've got some brain damage. Elliot Jacks. Do you know Elliot Jacks, Lucio?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, he has a nice book called, I've got it on my shelf. I can't remember the title. I can see it up there.
In Praise of Hierarchy.
That may be one of his. It may be one of his.
In Praise of Hierarchy.
Okay.
Marcus, can you write on the chat maybe for everybody?
He talks about MHAs. Anyway, he talks very nicely about these hierarchical business organizations and military organizations, and he has some nice distinctions. But that's a step too far from what I'm talking about in my chapter. Okay, next slide, please, Lucio. Now, yes, you're quite right. Using the word closed there is ambiguous with respect to I've already used the word closed with respect to organizationally closed, and I can't remember what word you proposed, restricted or something. I can't remember, but it would be a good idea within certain situations. There may well be social networks where new members may not be added. If we're strictly speaking of a biological family, for example, with mother, father, son, blah, blah. I mean, if the father, if they've got so many children, if they're all sterilized, then there would be no more members added. But I'm sure there are other examples. There are secret societies, private clubs, which at a certain point say there are no more vacancies. You know, you must wait for someone in this network to die before you can be admitted as a new member. So there are obviously variations there. Okay, and that's very straightforward. Now, maybe the case that individual socialites are members of several social networks. Well, yes. I mean, this is, I mean, in sociology, in other terminology, people talk about social roles and the number of social roles that a particular human social actor may have, and we can even apply that to a social system, a collective, as an actor. It may function in different networks. I've got, you know, I like very much what you did at the end, where you emphasised the cycles and the recursivity networks of networks. I mean, there is so much. I thought I'd include it. That next slide, please. Okay. Well, the system properly focused on input output, but well, inputs and outputs are distinguished by external observers. If we're looking at a well, I would say an organization closed system or a self-organizing system, something which is has some form of closure, autonomy, a system that is maintaining itself, then it itself is actively interacting with the environment and selecting what are the inputs. You know, it has selective attention, and its behaviors, its actions are done in the context of that. So you have a sensory motor system, if you like, which is circularly connected. So whatever the system does affects what the system experiences, and the experiences in turn affect what the system does. So there's that continual behaving and perceiving activity of a system, social system, if you like, or human system, psychological individual, and it's within that continual circularity of system of if you like, output and input, but sensing and motoring, doing stuff and perceiving stuff, that the system encounters invariants in its environment, things that recur, that crop up again and again or don't go away. So a young infant will eventually distinguish objects like its feeding bottle or its dolly, and its mother, which come and go, and its parents, its mother, which comes and go with slightly different 18 months possibly. It begins to be seemingly, as far as we can tell, be observing its invariant object. As von Förster puts it, the observer is his own ultimate object. So there's a point where a baby, material individuality is the biological orthopedic system, where it's functioning around an awareness of itself as an object amongst the world. It takes it a while to get there, but eventually it does. And then interestingly, you have another 2 or 3 years of development, fascinating processes whereby the infant acquires a psychological self and can interact in a reflective manner with other human beings and so on. And sadly, there are occasions where infants do not get the requisite stimulation, social stimulation, or experiential stimulation to develop healthily, as you will find if you as people found when they went to the disabled children that were all over Romania, where children were just abandoned in cots with no stimulation and no social stimulation, no external stimulation to speak of. So all that is a wonderful process whereby systems become what they are. If you're talking about systems just as a system with inputs and outputs, you're looking at a machine of some sort. Okay. The network property focuses on internal structure of systems, that is its parts. Well, I already mentioned the distinction made between the structure of a system at any one time and its organization. So the topology in that sense is changing. And here you say self-organization is becoming a crucial thing too. Well, self-organization as a term has got at least 3 separate meanings that I discern in the literature. From the early days in the cybernetic world of von Förster, Pask, Ross Ashby, for example, the concept was roughly based on a biological system, but as a system that is continually as it behaves, is learning, adapting, growing, and so on. So that's the kind of active system. Around the same time, you got the term used by Ilya Prigogine, where he talks about self-organization in the context of of chemical and physical systems, where stabilities emerge at far from equilibrium places. Stick a bit of heat into a certain mix of chemicals, and eventually it'll start oscillating from one form to another. It shows a stability of structure, using structure in how Prigogine uses the emergence of structure, the emergence of systems. But that's biological. Sorry, that's physical and chemical. It's not biological in the sense of the biological self-organizing systems are autopoietic. Prigogine's physical and chemical systems are not autopoietic. If you have a river flowing down a hill, you'll see it going over rocks, and you see stable structures forming, whirlpools, waves, all sorts of things happening, including temporary places where the flow seems to go backwards and then come down again as it goes into some sort of hole or whatever. Now that's all change of structure, and that's self-organization in Prigogine's terms. But it's also a nice model of the underlying process that's going on all the time in our world of second law of thermodynamics. Increase of entropy as the energy is dissipated and the structure's being formed temporarily as the energy tries to dissipate itself quickly. It's doing it too fast, so it bounces up structures around it, like the waves, the whirlpools, and so on, as an analogy. And that's where we come from, in a great soup that was the original soup of the earth, where these structures emerged and eventually became autocatalytic, and eventually organizationally closed in the sense of autopoietic, with a self-constructed boundary around them which they maintain, as we do with our carapaces, our bodies, our skin and things, and apart from a few orifices which we have, which we maintain close control over what comes in and goes out. So all that is lovely, but there's three senses of self-organization: the Prigogine sense, the abstract von Förster, Ross Ashby, Beer, Pask sense of a system that is dynamically evolving and emerging. And then there's the one which is used in the social sciences to refer to the activity of a collective or an individual human social actor, where the social actors are together creating themselves as an organization. They're self-organization. They say, okay, let's play a game of football, who wants to be the captain? Who wants to be the self-organization happens in human systems all the time. And it's also happening within the individual. You cannot not think, you cannot not conceptualize. We as humans are always thinking, we're always, well, some of us more than others, inventing things, questioning things. That's the dynamic of self-organization. And you can look at it in the biomechanical structure, the brain, the body system. You can see the dynamics going on, which is what the neuroscientists look at when they get their scans out and start observing things, MRIs, this, that, and the other. And also what you get if you observe what's happening in someone's mind as they are learning and creating and possibly conversing with others. In fact, that's how you generally find out what's going on in someone else's mind, is by having a conversation with them and seeing how they self-organize, or how they have self-organized in the past. So, that's agreed. So I do, I mean, I appreciate you've got a nice metaphor here, but I'm not using the same two perspectives that you're using, and I wouldn't say it's a way, it's analogous to wave power. But there is this dualism in past theory, which is two perspectives on the same object. I mean, if you're lying on a operating table in a hospital, I can look at you as a lump of meat, and I'm going to cut out your tonsils or your appendix, or I'm going to sew up some injury you've got. And at that time, I've got a perspective of you as a Pascal mechanical individual, a body, if you like. And when the experiment, when I finish the operation and you come round, the anaesthetist says to me, okay, at a certain point, the anaesthetist will say, hello, are you there? And the patient says, yes, I'm here. They've woken up and they are now conscious where they weren't before. They're conscious, they're knowing with the other human beings in that operating theatre, and they're capable of having a conversation. So there is then a different perspective where you're seeing a psychological individual embodied in that body. It's not just the body that you've been dealing with. So different perspectives, certainly, but I appreciate the helpfulness there can be of having some kind of understanding that there may be more than one perspective on a particular system, depending on the context and one's interests. Oh, I think is that the last slide? Last slide, Lucio. Ah. Reciprocity. Well, I'm saying the reciprocity of relations. Here you're echoing what I said earlier, that organizational charts are directed networks, and that the people at the bottom of the hierarchy don't have reciprocal relations in that sense with the ones at the top. But the reciprocity that exists, any reciprocity at all, is about the expectations. So I might be I might be a participant in a social network at the lowest level, but it's because of the expectations that I have about the other actors that make me willing to pay attention to what my manager is saying and what my manager demands, and also makes me understand that my manager is expecting me to obey his commands, but not expecting me to command him or question him, except in the context of the very particular task that I've been set. And certainly I'm not permitted possibly to go anywhere near the people at higher levels unless I escape from the manifest hierarchy and go and complain to HR, Human Relations Department, that I'm being bullied by somebody. And of course, in which case the management structure, which includes AR, closes ranks and very often shuts me up, ignores me, expels me from the network altogether, or could do. Okay, but I recommend Elliot Jacks's work. In a moment, I'll go and see if I can. I just want to confirm it's the same book that I've got that Mark has quoted. That for cyberneticians interested in social organisations, social institutions, it's a jolly good read. He was my professor for a while, by the way. That's how I know about him. I think that's your last slide, Lucio.
No, this is the last one.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
As I say, I think there's some misunderstandings, and you have a whole, conceptual theory of your own theory of how to understand organizations, how to model them, and so on. And we're just at cross purposes a bit in our perceptions and terminology. But thank you very much.
Okay.
Is someone now the chair? Oh no, it's we have another. Is it Shantanu's turn, Jason?
Shantanu. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So I don't have a lot of text in my presentation because I wanted to make it visual and sort of rely on Pasque's conversation theory, and then of course interpret Bernard's book through the lens of conversation theory, since that's what I have been focusing my work in cybernetics on over the past 2 years, since when I've been interacting with both Paul and Bernard, and they've been gracious to teach me a bunch. And just to be specific, I apply conversation theory to studying classroom systems and educational systems. But of course, I do understand the merit in using conversation theory to, of course, design machines, model networks at the classroom level, but also outside, as a general systems theory to do so. And my reading of Bernard's book, chapter about social networks sort of further illuminated these ideas. So I'd just like to, summarize what I have inferred from the chapter over the next couple minutes. So please bear with me. And if anything gets too complex, feel free to chime in and ask me a question. So I want to start with, Pasque's first presentation, of course, the physical analogs to the growth of a concept, which became the metaphor that he used to sort of understand contagion in social networks, where he attached a thermally sensitive resistance to electrodes dipped in a solution and saw that reinforcing the system with current allowed the current to flow through the nodes in that system in a more or less equal fashion depending on how you modeled it, right? And he said that you can replicate this process in social systems to some degree, except you must understand the way that agents within those social systems evolve as eigenbehaviors, right? Because we come to a social system, say a student comes to a classroom every day, and accumulates ideas iteratively. Yes, so they change each session, for example, and the P individuals that they create diversify, right? Those M individuals keep creating P individuals together within that network. So of course, the M and P individual distinction is super important to Bernard's chapter, where he discusses the quality of networks, right? So hunks of metal or flesh, the machines and their extensions, right? A human can use a hearing aid, for example, can wear clothes, can use a writing tool to express ideas. And these are extensions of the M individual, and they, humans collaborate with one another and also interact with machines to produce conceptual operators that they are interested in. And these are P individuals, right? And per past conversation theory, several M individuals can embody a single P individual and share a particular activity or goal, right? Or a rule system, but also one M individual can have several thoughts on their mind, right? Or have several rule systems by which they operate on. So a P individual must be processed by one or more M individuals. And this distinction is super important to understanding social networks, I think. So what does this help do? In my work, and I bet in Bernard's work, just because, we studied EdTech quite a bit, it helps provide a lexicon to define the quality of conceptual operators being grappled with in any system, right? So in a classroom system, the M and P individual distinction, for example, can help you see what topics students are discussing together, how they're expanding on that object language that you provide them with the curriculum, right? And Pascal called that an object language. And of course, it helps you identify who the machine and human systems are and what ideas they're producing. It's especially useful, I would say, to understand technology-enhanced learning and technology-enhanced processes, because it provides you a way to understand how to design both tools that facilitate concept development, right? And also ways to understand how to train users to interact with these tools. to produce new conceptual operators with each other, right? And Bernard taps into this when he talks about sort of networks, right? And at large in society, maybe on the internet as well, these are organizationally closed, right? They have a closed structure. The ideal structure of any, social network, like for a classroom, for example, I want all my 30 students, for example, to interact with each other to the maximum potential, right? And have close ties between them.
Shantanu,
Yes.
I ask you to speak a little slower.
Oh, I'm sorry.
A little more slowly.
Okay. So yes, I'll go slowly, Bernard. Sorry, that's my bad. So in a classroom, for example, I have 30 students, right? They're not going to, it's not compulsory that all of them are going to interact with each other by the end of the semester, right? I don't know unless I do a graph theory analysis to see whether those unique ties, like I think 30 agents would have, I had 31 agents in my classroom last time, and they had the ideal number of ties between them was 465. But I didn't know whether they reached these number of unique ties, by the end of the network or by the end of the semester. But they were informationally open to these new ideas and plugged into the internet. So they were constantly bringing new ideas into the system and then reproducing those ideas together. So to me, when I read Bernard's chapter and he was talking about organizational closure and informational openness, that's what that meant to me, where there is a non-triviality to the system, where the input and the output contingency isn't necessarily non-variable, right? It can be variable because they're finally humans interacting with maybe technologies. But you try to model the system to your best capacity to reach this max number of ties to have stability. But that's not to say that if you don't reach, full closure, that it's not an ideal system or that it's not a good system. It's just a system where you've tried your best to do that in a participatory way by being a part of it, by analyzing it, by trying to design it, such that it reaches that stage or can reach that stage or has the potential to thrive to reach that stage, right? So even in a hierarchical counterpart to such a distributed system, I'm giving you the example of a distributed system like a classroom, but a firm, for example, like what Stafford Beer studied and used the VSM like as a neural metaphor, like the metaphor of the nervous system to understand the hierarchy of the firm. The people within each level were still reproducing new ideas in these small groups together and preserving the structure of the firm itself. Like Bernard said, it preserves its integral parts to create new ideas, to make sure that it's functioning efficiently, right? But that being said, you need to know who agents within the system are in order to make sure that they thrive, right? And that's amity. Past called that amity. You need to sort of make sure that there's an opportunity for interaction, for open interaction to occur, right? So what defines an actor in a network? So this slide sort of mirrors what Lucio had, right? Bernard lays out 4 criteria that looks at membership, right? Their capabilities, what they bring to the network. What are the node attributes that you're studying? Are you studying reflection, right? Are you studying the number of ties between people? Are you studying the level of perspective taking? Are you looking at the level of collective efficacy or some more psychometric measure within the network? And of course, is the observer part of the network, right? So am I looking at it as a detached observer or am I a participant observer? And am I interacting with them and giving feedback actively to them, right? Or am I looking at it after the fact that I've done some intervention on them as a detached observer? And that's why I say, you need to know who these people are within these networks, especially if you're looking at human ones, because we perceive each other and we perceive the self, right? This is an adaptation that I have made of a sketch by Pask. And I think it talks about metacognition, but it treats metacognition as more distributed and says we need to be able to perceive each other as an environment, right? A machine, that can actually understand conceptual operators needs to perceive its user as its environment. Whereas a language corpus can't do that right now. So a chatbot, like Bernard said, needs to be modeled as a network. and needs to perceive its users as an environment and understand the conceptual operators relevant to them at a particular point of time for it to actually, you know, be deemed as an intelligent machine. And that's why Pask would call it a partially intelligent machine, right? So what are the interactions and rule systems within these networks, right? So Bernard talks about the affordances and goals of these systems, what you want to do with them, right? Lucio brought up the idea of hierarchical networks being more or less unidirectional, right? But that depends on how the observer models them, right? The idea of a system reproducing ideas and a network being identified by or modeled by an observer is key to this distinction, I think. And I do sort of agree with the idea that all systems can be modeled as networks, right? But not all networks can be systems, right? So if you look at the VSM, for example, it's more hierarchical, right? Because it's looking at interactions between several levels of a firm, but that is not to say that it's not open to new ideas, right? People could come in and make suggestions to improve its structure, but each level maintains its closure, right? It maintains its integral parts to create new ideas. So what about membership? Individual actors can, of course, be members of several networks because we're human, we're social animals, right? There's an overlap between some of these. There may even be conflict between some of these, and how we grapple these, how we perceive each other as productive agents within these networks sort of allows us to operate on new ideas together or not. You know what I mean? Others can be more restrictive. But one that is not, I would argue, open to new ideas becomes an echo chamber where people are just agreeing with each other rather than engaging in sustained concept development, right? Consensus is not the goal, right? Consensus may be the goal of conversation theory, but if you look at, say, interaction of actors theory that extends from it, the intentions are created by the M individuals, right, that have certain intentions. And those intentions can evolve as eigenbehaviors. So if you're able to encourage civil discourse and reflectivity within these networks, then new ideas are constantly developed. So with regards to membership and also closure, I just want to share my screen again and show you a Reddit community that I ran with my students over the past year. So this network is closed per Bernard's definition of the idea of, you know, having closed membership because it's private. I don't want grifters in my educational community from the internet at large, right? My students are the ones here. I had 30 students last semester and 30 students this semester. But in the fall, I had just the 30 students, right? And nobody else could join. But in my spring semester, I sort of added 30 more students to the network, and then they could look back on the ideas of the previous 30 students and recreate them in this open source way. And they were posting memes, interacting with each other. We would have live discussions that were projected on a screen every week, and they would interact, you know, remix ideas together. And what I did in that setting is go in every week and become a participant observer, where I was modeling the network to be ideal and then saying, I'm going to conduct a network analysis of these live chats every week and then give design feedback to the system every week and say, this is what I saw from you guys. How do you think we can improve this together? So I wasn't only observing them as a detached observer, right? I was there, I was teaching them, but I was also understanding their needs on an ongoing basis to make sure that, you know, the power of discussions or the conceptual operators were sound, goal-oriented, and that they were meeting my students' needs, right? So participatory action and taking an aggregate view of these social systems, you know, which is not the norm in psychology so far, at least in education so far. We look at individuals. We don't treat these networks as informationally open or plugged into the internet. I wanted to do that with my students, right? And make this informationally open. So this is an example of like applying, you know, Bernard's ideas to a classroom social system and making it sort of open to new ideas, but preserve its structure over a semester, right? And how did I use graph theory to do that? Graph theory, like Bernard says, helps metricize relational systems, right? And you could input a social network into R and understand its density, its eigencentrality, its transitivity. And I can model this as an observer, providing an intervention that cannot be altered at all beforehand, or I can alter the intervention to meet the needs of the agents within the system, right? And become a participant observer within that system. So while cultural markets, corporations are directed and hierarchical and metricized, I think that the distinction that is important to make is that they provide services and they don't so much focus on concept development and exploratory activity as their primary focus. And I think that would define their structure. You know what I mean? You can see that a firm is more hierarchical. Postal services are more hierarchical, like Lucio said. But the idea behind them is to sort of maintain the structure of a cultural market, right? And deliver goods and services to people. Whereas a more distributed system can be modeled in a similar fashion, I would argue, to encourage concept development, where each person is an eigenform that evolves over time, and you need to sort of model them as such. So those are my inferences from this chapter, especially in the context of applying it to education, and being a participant observer within these systems and really meeting people's needs, rather than just metricizing them.
Okay, thank you very much, Shantanu. Did we clap? Lucio, I hope so. If I may respond, Jason?
Yes, your turn.
Thank you very much, Shantanu. It was very helpful to have someone use past ideas, other than me, or Paul come to that. I mean, we're growing a community of people who are reasonably familiar with past distinctions and his ideas, which is very gratifying, having been peddling them for 50 years. But from another perspective, what you're talking about, what I've been talking about, is participatory action research. That's a term, and certainly in the social cybernetics community, it is explicitly acknowledged as being based on second-order cybernetics. Observers observing observers, and communicating the communications between them. There's a very strong school in Mexico, in one of I can't remember the name of the university. Anyway, they're active members of RC51 on social cybernetics. And they do a whole lot of participatory observation research projects around the country, usually concerned with developing communities, helping communities become self-empowered. So encourage them to become self-organized. It's kind of a beautiful example of the work that is talked about by Paula Fiera, that kind of action in the community work. And of course, there's also, with us today, we have Gerard Diu, who also has worked for many years and generated many students concerned with working with communities in this participatory way to empower people. And so perhaps Aaron might say something in a moment about how he looks at this activity of working in society as an observer, as a responsible observer. So really, that's it. Thank you for that. There's one that I've just been looking through the chat. There's one thing which I came across. I think it was Paul. Someone raised the question about whether PASCs. It's from Peter, wasn't it? Bernard, would you regard PASC colloquy of mobiles as a social system, albeit one involving non-human components? I suppose the answer is no. what I would do, because it's I mean this is one of the reasons why Pask is fascinating, because he takes you to the edge, you know, with his chemical experiments and his active theatre and his musical systems. They're designed to interact with human beings, but to some extent they're capable of autonomous action, which makes it look as if they are, in a sense, social, sentient, and so on. If you're not familiar with the colloquy of mobiles, you should know that Paul Pangaro has recently rebuilt it. It's a kind of an active sculpture installation in which mobiles, that's robots hanging from beams, interact with each other. There are male robots and female robots. They're armed with torches and mirrors, and they're programmed to look for optimal relations between them. I think the aim is to mate, and there are rules that they're obeying, and they're jiggling about on this apparatus, swirling around each other, and as a colloquy, a community of machines, looking for a stable configuration where their drives, their needs, their biological needs, if you like, their needs are satisfied. The interesting thing is, and where it definitely does become a social system, or the embodiment of a social system, is when you have human beings participating in that colloquy of mobiles, using their own mirrors and torches to interact with the components, you know, the robots or whatever, the mobiles, and become a part of that community. So, and at that point, I really think, Paul, have I got it right?
Yep. Nothing to it.
Thank you very much.
I have a question. Would Pask have thought that the colloquy of mobiles was a real social system? I mean, I know you, Bernard, think that you need sentient human beings in the system for it to be that way. Well, but would Pask have thought that? I'm not sure.
No, Pask would anything social. It's not. Pask P individual is a psychosocial conception. I mean, as individual selves, we are psychosocial. You know, we've been created and evolved and learned as part of a social system. So in our minds, we are embodied. Our thoughts are embodied. The psychosocial thoughts. Individually, we are social systems, psychosocial systems.
So would Pask have regarded the individual mobiles as P individuals? I guess that's my question.
No, they're not. They're not organizationally closed as P individuals. They're not evolving, conceptualizing at all. They're just following algorithms.
Bernard, would you say at least that it would be a metaphor for what humans may do in that situation, though, because it represents human reproduction?
Well, I mean, he created it for a purpose, as I understand. When he was building it, I was working for him, with him, in his laboratory, and I was doing what I consider to be very heavy-duty, serious studies of human learning and teaching, and we built a learning environment, interactive learning environment called Pask, and we built a software system that juggled around with concept maps called Thought Sticker. We were doing all this serious stuff, and for some reason he decides he wants to contribute to this cybernetic serendipity exhibition organized by Yasha Reinhardt, and I'm going to myself, I'm going, what's he doing this for? What's this? You know, it's just a toy. You know, it's a play. It's art. You know, I don't do art. I'm a scientist. But then years after thinking about it, years and years later, it's a delightful way of bringing attention to the concept of individuals of some sort being in conversation, interacting one with another. It's a lovely little microcosm model of the social world. It's a very simple one and it's very restricted, but you can. The genius is to allow humans to become participant observers as well. I mean, that's great. And then after all these years, it's dawned on me that he wasn't just, showing off, or he was wanting to educate the world about his ideas from another direction, not in the formal world of psychological journals or books about education or whatever, but about the general world about art and active architecture. It's a way of drawing attention to these processes and bringing them into conversation about conversation. And so it goes. And we've had this wonderful replication of the colloquy and exhibitions of it made by Paul and other colleagues. And the story goes on. It still excites attention and provokes conversation about conversation. So it was another aspect of his genius that he did it, that he conceived it, he created it, and he gave it to the world.
Jamie raised the hand.
Pardon? Sorry.
Jamie raised the hand. Go ahead, Jamie.
You're muted, Jamie.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, I just want to, I don't know whether this is the right moment to say this, but I think this is important. I really found what Shantanu did was an absolute fascinating extension from your work and Pask's work. And I would propose that maybe Shantanu gives another presentation that we can really focus on what you did and on that particular aspect of Bernard and Pask's work, because I understand the goal of this presentation is to look at the entirety of Bernard's book. But I think what you do is so interesting, and there's so many interesting issues that it really deserves something especially dedicated to it. And the one little comment that I just wanted to make to get back to the topic and also to Lucio's is this the use of the word closed system, because I understand what you said, Shantanu, it is a closed system. However, all your students were still, it was not a maximum security prison in which the students had zero connections with the outside world. So this really gets to what do we mean by closed? And I'm assuming you have, of course, explained it in great detail in your work, but the importance of language usage, and that is just a reference to the languaging of Maturana and Varela. I'm not implying that my criticism is original, but so anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for this awesome presentation, and thank you, Bernard, for writing your awesome book.
Well, it's very kind, very kind of Jamie. In the
context to do his presentation.
In the context of Shantanu giving us a more extended look at his work, I would include Paul Pangaro as one of the primary influences. It's through Paul I got to know Shantanu, and of course Paul is well conversation theory, and he'd already infected Shantanu with these ideas, to use a metaphor.
I was just the carrier. I was not the virus.
May I, Jason, some of you may or may not know that in past later years, he spent quite a number of years working with Gerard de who's with us at the University of Amsterdam on a program about OOC. I can't remember what it stands for, Gerard. And there is a sense in which, really an explicit sense in which Pask interaction of actors theory is really Pascal and Zhu's interaction of actors theory, although Herard speaks his own conceptual language in terms of, he's been studying, social processes all his life. And I wonder if he would say a few words about what we've been talking about today, particularly this idea of participant observation. And, well, whatever you want. Speak about whatever you wish, Herard. A pleasure to hear your voice.
Thank you for asking the question. One of the things that may not have come to the fore very explicitly, but was quite important to Gordon, in fact, is that things like participant observation are not just names of what people do. I mean, if I go to a football match, I'm a participant observer. If I'm dancing, I'm a participant observer. The point that was important, I think, and that maybe discussed maybe in the next meeting, is that observation is part of a particular intentional act, which is research. So you want to study something, not only in the sense that you provide labels to what you study, but also in the sense that you make it possible to identify a notion like justification. Is one thing more preferable than another? Are certain concepts more preferable than others, and what are the reasons for that? So the only addition, I'm sorry that I limit myself to this, is what is the context of the terms that are being explored? For example, what is the context of cybernetics? It's not just this discipline that people talk about, but it's a discipline where people develop models and test them. So that is my only contribution. I'm sorry, a bit limited, but we can continue.
Please, Jason, Herard has just volunteered to give a presentation.
Just need the time. What date you are going to do it, let me know. We prefer Wednesdays, if possible.
I referred to the fact that next month I will be discussing chapter 10.
So we'll be discussing what, Herard?
Months. We will be, I will be one of those who are discussing your chapter 10.
Oh,
Chapter
okay.
10.
Yeah, well, there's some later date, Herard, because there is, as well as the discussions about the chapters of my book, there is the ongoing Club of Remy meetings where different individuals choose to give presentations about their work and ideas. Shantanu has just been invited to do that and has accepted. And you indirectly, when you said like to be continued, have done the same thing, I believe. If you're happy about it, at some time in the future, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 months time, you could give a presentation to us on one of the Wednesday sessions on a subject of your own choosing.
Well, anyway, thank you for referring to that. I consider myself an authentic member of the Club of Remy. So in that sense, I have no problem. I already contributed last time, I think, by discussing the notion of disagreement.
Well, I think I must have missed that, Herard.
It's not important, but, you know, I like these concepts. Disagreement, it's maybe just a simple word, but it's also a very complicated type of activity in terms of research.
Absolutely.
I don't agree with you.
That's what we are going to find out.
I'm not sure if I agree or disagree with you.
Better.
Okay.
Marcus, you want to say something? Mute it.
Mute.
You're still
need to-
muted.
Marcus, yes, that's it.
You say, if I want to say something, I say not immediately about this thing, disagreement, etc. We were talking, but about the two presentations. I have only 2 points, and that's for Lucio Biggiero. He says he was talking about mentioning Luhmann, and we were talking about autopoiesis, etc. And several of us said that autopoiesis is not something applicable to organizations, and we know that Maturana never claimed that his autopoiesis concept was applicable to organizations. It is what social scientists, organization scientists have done. Now, one cannot say that all of this application of the autopoiesis concept to organization is erratic. I would like to remind, Luhmann has been cited, and for Luhmann, for example, he uses the term of the concept of autopoiesis, but the pieces of an organization for him are not people. We all have now talked, one of us has talked about machines as parts of hospitals. We have talked about organizations composed by people. For Luhmann, the components of an organization are communications. And so that's an entirely different situation.
Yes, quite.
So that was my first point for Lucio. And the second point is for Shantanu. Shantanu, you mentioned twice Beer's viable system model. And you said that it is a metaphor. And I disagree.
Yeah.
Well, I would say if it's a metaphor, it's not only a metaphor. Metaphor, it's we express something in terms of something else. So we have gene map, for example, and it's a cartographic metaphor because it's not a map. But I would like to say, many people call the viable system model as an analogy. They say it's an analogy of the human nervous system. And I would put to the fore that it's in the first place a homomorphic mapping. It's a homomorphic mapping of the, and so on.
Okay, may I add to that, because many of us in the cybernetics community are aware of Gordon Pask's definition in his 1975 book, The Cybernetics of Human Learning and Performance. In the introduction, he defines cybernetics as the I can't remember, the cyberneticians manipulate justifiable metaphors. Now, in that context, he was already using homomorphic mappings in his work. We use this as we modeled conversational domains, the relationship between a theory and the world it was modeling, homomorphic analogy between the real world and the abstract world. And but he's noting that a metaphor is an abbreviated, a compressed analogy. So you can always open up the analogy to reveal a homomorphic mapping, if only roughly, because it's homomorphic, not isomorphic. So some of us, when we say, well, that's a metaphor, are aware there's a bit more to it than just saying you're just being poetic, as it were. But anyway, thank you, because that's clarifies how that's another way we need to share our understandings of the language that we think, the terminology and the language that we use. So by the way, Paul, Marcus is the person from Switzerland. I was trying to remember his name yesterday.
I figured.
Respect to people who
Yeah.
are thoroughly familiar with VSM, not only conceptually but practically. So like Lucio with his practical work, and Marcus, I'm in awe of people who engage actively with social institutions and organization and management and so on, whatever terminology or theory or metaphors and models are being used. I think it's a very brave thing to take on. I've only ever done it in a subordinate role as part of a research team when I've been invited to go and interview people inside organizations and so on, run workshops.
Peter.
I want to toss out the question of whether communicative interactions are adequate for a full social theory You know, I would think that not only communications, but power relations and material exchanges and all the different psychological dimensions of emotional support and all the different dimensions by which we relate to each other. It's not just via communicative interactions, I think. But I'd be interested in, so is a theory based on communicative interactions the full theory? Is it going to capture the full richness of human social behavior or not?
Well, like everybody, if Luhmann sees something very big and very clear, but on one eye he's blind like all of us.
Well, I don't care about what Luhmann thinks. What do we think? What should a social theory, cybernetically informed social theory?
Absolutely, Paul. Peter, everything.
Everything? Okay.
Yes, I tried to say this to you in an email recently. I've been inspired, particularly in this context, by Pascal and von Förster, but in particular Stafford Beer, who on several occasions in his later life said, cybernetics is about being holistic. We are interested in everything. We are studying everything. We're doing our best to learn about everything. And for that, as I think I proposed my little book as a useful, it's really a tri-perspective book where I try to bring together our understandings of the biological, the psychological, and the sociological within one overall conceptual framework, which is cybernetic in its form and its construction in its form, basically, full of circles.
So where would things like emotional support, things like coercion and power relations,
well in my
material
book,
parts of our existence, you know, our economic selves and political legal selves, and
these are all things which are being examined in different specialities. And as a psychologist, I happen to be reasonably familiar with some of the work that's been done on emotions and feeling. There's a lot of controversy, a lot of reasons. And in my book, there's I think there's a brief paragraph and a footnote. Yeah, and I think it's possibly the section in chapter 4. There's a section called interaction, and I think I introduced the importance of emotions there. So it's all one. Pass himself a certain stage in development conversations would say a thought is a feeling. Individuals are always embodied. It's we observers who make the distinctions between these things. As living systems behave, they're feeling, they're doing things, they're communicating, they're conceptualizing, they're doing all sorts of stuff. It's all one thing. And it's the same with the body itself. When we think, well, there's the brain, there's the heart, there's the kidneys, we can do a certain amount of functional isolation in terms of distinguishing systems, but the whole thing is one system. And certainly as emphasized by Maturana and a great lady called Candace Pert in her book, Molecules of Emotion. If you're not familiar with it, get it now. Molecules of Emotion, Candace Pert. And she points out that at the molecular level, the immune system, the neurological system, and the endocrine system, they're all one system. And you, as an observer of those systems, you cannot, if a particular molecule is traveling through the bloodstream, you cannot, she actually refers to them as information carrying molecules, but you, as an observer, you do not know what information that molecule is carrying, because it will have a different effect or carry a different message depending on where it ends up in the body. A particular molecule may, communicate something to the brain if it arrives in the brain, or if it arrives in a gland, it may communicating something there. So the body really is one system. And on the strength of her book, which was around late 1990s, Stafford Beer personally kind of awarded her the Norbert Wiener Gold Medal of the American Society for Cybernetics. So
okay,
of the World Organization of Systems in Cybernetics. It was WOSC, World Organization of Systems in Cybernetics.
No, I'm talking about the 2000 conference of the ISSS, which had a pre-conference involving cybernetics and system societies from all around the world. It was a mega event, and many of them were talking about the climate change and ecological disaster. Absolutely astonishing, and that's 20 years ago, and you think, the world is still stupid on that front. But each organization had a separate series of meetings, and the ASC had a meeting, and Stanford hosted this guest lecture from Candace Pert. And interestingly, in that same meeting, there was a certain side, it doesn't call, as far as I know, Umberto Maturana has never called himself a cybernetician, but he was present there as a member of the ASC, and he engaged in a discussion afterwards about what was meant by molecules carrying information, because we're back to that difficult word and how we understand it. But the overall conception of organisms at the molecular level being one system was fascinating. And I read that book following that meeting, and it's still there, and it's still groundbreaking. She did pioneering work on whatever they call it, the big molecules in the brain, and by all reports, she should have got the Nobel Prize, but instead it went to two of her male colleagues. And that's a by the by, because she was a woman. She didn't get the Nobel Prize. Marcus is gone. Okay, no, he hasn't. So I was so knocked out by that that her work as an understanding of the biological systems. Have you got it there? Well done. Fabulous. Okay, yeah, that's it. Thank you, Marcus. So later, when Maturana started to use the term autopoiesis at the molecular level, it made better sense, and I think he kind of unified. It cuts out all the complexity and detail of a particular biological system with all its components and its heart, brain, blood vessels, blah blah blah, whether it's or down to whether it's a little a mouse or a worm or an amoeba. It's autopoiesis at the molecular level. These are all autopoietic systems, and so it's fascinating. To me, it clarified a lot. It made things seem easier.
Lucio, would you like to share with us what's in your mind now? Lucio.
Yes, yes. There was Jamie with raised hand. Anyway,
Jamie, after you. Yeah.
okay. My comment is about the question that Marcus reminded. He is right that for Luhmann, the components of social systems are communications. It's true, but it's in my view, it's a trick. I mean, it's the trick used by Luhmann just to avoid all the problems that would have raised when considering social systems made of some materials, any way people or machines. I mean, it was the way to escape from all the problems. But in my view, my opinion, it's a trick because communication doesn't exist in the heterogeneous world. I mean, communication is embodied. It's always embodied, materialized in people, if we are speaking as communication between people, or even in machines, if it's communication between computers, for example. But it's embodied in computers. Yeah. So the escape, I mean, the escamotage used by Luhmann doesn't work because he claims, I mean, the fiction is that there could exist a social system of communications without communicators.
Yeah.
Because communications are made by communicators. And so again, you throw out your problem from the door, but it came in from the window.
Yeah, I think you're so right. You're so right, Lucio. And the way I read it is that Luhmann wanted to develop a sociological theory at the macro level, and so he reduces human beings as to be the environment for these strange abstract communication systems. And at one point, he comes up with this absolutely, to my mind, meaningless term. He says, only communication can communicate. I mean,
it's a nonsense. It's a nonsense because only I would change in only communicators do communicate.
Exactly.
And so the point is, sorry, let me finish a moment, because this is an important point as concerning the question. Again, I go back on the question of closure. I am a communicator belonging to my university, but at the same time, I belong to other social systems. At the same time, I am a member of my university. I'm a member of a political party. I'm a member of many other social systems. And as a communicator, I spread what I understand in the university, also in the other social systems. I'm not schizophrenic and divide myself and communicate only what is dealing with university when I am in the university, and only dealing with the political party when I am in the political party. I am a unity. And so what I develop in my mind and my knowledge is crossing over these systems just because I am the bridge, the connection, the living bridge between these systems. So forget closure. That's the point. Forget closure.
Yeah,
social systems are open in any sense.
So let me, it's not something I put in the book because it was, at the time I was writing, it was slightly too complicated an idea. I'd introduced the idea that, you know, the body is biologically autopoietic, straightforward, that the mind, in past terms, is a psychological individual, a system of concepts which is self-reproducing. We are always reproducing our own thoughts, and as such, it's an organizationally closed system of concepts. Now, we maintain our integrity. Now, what Pas added to his thinking a few years later was that we are, please allow me to finish, was that we are, the P individuals are organizationally closed in the sense that they conserve their organization, but they're informationally open, and that when they converse with another P individual, they share concepts, we learn about each other. I'm open to you, you're open to me, we're less, and we're Pas called it being informationally open. Now it's his own peculiar terminology, but he's emphasizing what is peculiar about psychological individuals, that we are informationally open. We're not closed monads. We're not Leibnizian monads. We are open, and we are open by choice. The reason why your ideas are being taken up is because people are listening and looking for these ideas. They are open for more information, in the sense of more concepts, more news, more stuff. And we're all doing that all the time. We're always looking to learn. Pas would say, man, we are systems that need to learn. We can't help it. We keep learning. So we're open to these ideas, and they come in, and one way or another, we embody them, incorporate them. Incorporate's probably a better word. No, it's still body, but we add them to our existing repertoire of ideas, and we try to make the idea, we adapt our ideas or not. Sometimes when people come up with new ideas, we reject them because they're too challenging for our existing ideas. That's when we go closed. People go closed in their thinking when they come across something which they find too challenging, or it doesn't fit, it's not comfortable. So no, go away, play a different game. But so yes, quite agree, we are communicators and receivers.
May I say, Jason, may
May
I take the word?
I?
So I say goodbye. I have to leave. I just want to say I'm not a specialist in Luhmann, and I think he has more to say than we had in this. I'm neither a fan of Luhmann, but I think he has been a little bit shortcut. He has more to say than it seemed in this discussion, which was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Indeed.
Bye,
Jenny.
Marcus. The one little comment I wanted to make, but maybe it's a big one, is Bernard, when you kind of set up cybernetics as dealing with everything, and I'm 61 years old and I've been hanging around the university since I was 19. And so I've encountered like at least 20 or let me more modest, 10 disciplines who claim that they're covering everything. So this economics, they say they're the foundational science. Evolutionary theory says they're actually below economics. Then the mathematicians say, well, we're the language of the book of nature. Semiotics has also claimed in the 1950s that they were going to be the foundational science. So have you ever considered to position your book, instead of saying that you're about everything, you're actually about difference, about how to work with distinctions in a disciplined manner? So that is.
Well, I suppose it's implicit because alongside the claim that cybernetics is about being holistic, I also point out that yes, there are other systems other theories, conceptual systems which claim to be metadisciplinary, if you like, transdisciplinary, metadisciplinary, or foundational, propedeutic. Psychology, in some senses, is propedeutic. You know, it's one of those. I say, well, high enough level of abstraction, all these map onto each other, if you like, or homomorphic mappings between them, because they're all saying the same things in very different ways. Now, the other big thing about cybernetics, because if we have to include second order cybernetics, because that makes it about everything. It's about ourselves. This imposes limits on what may be known and what may be done, as Pascal would put it, as Bertrand Russell would put it as well.
Yeah.
There's many great things. There are limits, and Heinz first would say, well, there are undecidable questions where we have to make our own distinctions, choose between them. And Pascal would say, life is ineffable. We can never finish telling the story. And it's also ineluctable. We cannot unlock it and get outside it and look at it, because we are it. And there are some beautiful things also said by Spencer Brown in the notes to Laws of Form on a similar thing, that we are. Yeah.
So, but here, if I may, I would point out, if a discipline claims to be about everything, it's the same thing about nothing at all, because as Lucio is kind of mentioning, we have problems, and to just say that every discipline is about everything, and they say everything only in different words, we never can like really focus on a problem. And so I'm just wondering, because if I look at George Spencer Brown, I can also say he's about distinctions. And if you look at one distinction, you can think it's the way to articulate a difference. And so so I can, and actually here I would like to make a connection to John Dewey and William James and Peirce, and especially William James, that he talks about the species present. So that he says we're always in the present when we are talking and testing, and but the present needs to be separated from the past and from the future.
Well,
and we can decide how we do it, but we're beginning to talk now about distinctions. Go ahead.
Well, this is, but the thing, there's a complementarity here, Jamie. Insofar as you're quite, it's about making distinctions. It's also about voiding distinctions. You know, Einstein voiced this distinction between matter and energy. Maxwell voided this distinction between electricity and magnetism, and innumerable human meditators and observers have voided the distinction between self and the world, and have had a transcendental experience. I'm just reporting something. That's a tale of what Don Juan would call a tale of power. So yes, we can avoid these distinctions, and it's a very great challenge to avoid the distinction between the self and the world, if one wants to go down that route. But it can be enlightening. Sorry.
So, but the question then is, does every distinction needs to be avoided? So I think it's more about the give and take, like what should we do, which one is more, or which ones are necessary, maybe
but it's
not necessary.
It's part of the progress, it has been, continues to be part of the progress of science and thinking in general, that we avoid distinctions, that we see what's the shared properties. We see that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here I would disagree. Here I would disagree that it is invariance is not the same as voiding every single distinction. Sorry, science has been presented as looking for invariance, like invariant whatever.
Well,
but then we also have to deal with the notion of change. And so how can we discuss change if we avoid all distinctions?
No, well, amongst other things, you have to avoid the distinction between science and non-science.
Or would you give us?
Do you want to avoid that distinction?
We are free to create distinctions. We are free to avoid them.
Yeah, but how does science operates? Is it that everyone comes up with his own set of distinctions, and then we spend like hours and hours on comparing and saying, I
Well,
work
yeah,
with
this, I mean, this is
Yeah.
the beauty of conversation theory or second order
Yeah.
science. Everybody comes up with their own set of distinctions,
Yeah.
and then we end up talking about them forever.
No, and then, but so here is where the rubber hits the ground. Like some problems need a decision.
Are you saying hearer?
Well, I said when we all talk about the distinctions by which we work, but at some moment the rubber hits the ground, or I don't know how they say that a decision needs to be made. And that the purpose of scientific conversations is to kind of have some minimal agreement from which you can make the decision.
Okay, well, let's go back to the laws of form. There are two laws. Okay, one is the law of calling, which says to call a name, like gravity, if you like, and then to call the name again, let's say gravity. If I say gravity to you, I've added nothing. I've just called the name. To call the name, so that's the calling. The second law, so I've made a distinction and I call the distinction. All I've done is made the same distinction by naming the distinction more than once. So that's redundancy. The other law is the law of crossing. If I make a distinction and then cross the boundary of that distinction and then recross the boundary of the distinction, I've got back to where I started. So to cross the boundary and recross the boundary is to get back to where you start. If you start from the outside of a distinction and go into it, like I step into a room and then step out of the room, I'm back where I was, which in Spencer Brown's notation is the void. So there's the naming function and the action function, actually moving, doing something, moving from there to there, either in thought or in action. These are in another respect. Well, that's enough. You know.
Okay, I totally appreciate.
I'll quote it in another way because I love these conversations. This is from Bertrand Russell in History of Western Philosophy. Somewhere he said, "We can never know the why of the world, because that would be to know the mind of God, and we can never know the how of the world, because that would be to know God as prime mover." So it's the same thought.
Yes, Bernard, but there is here a distinction whether that is said locally, here and now, or globally. So 100% I agree with you. We cannot make this global whys and hows, but in the here and now, we're making them all the time. And if I may, I totally accept your reading of George Spencer Brown. However, I read him entirely different. I see him working with 10 distinctions, which he introduces in the introduction very clearly. And then other people have said he's playing a language game, like Wittgenstein described. And the game is, what can you do with an algebra consisting of only one distinction? And then he demonstrates that you actually can do a lot. But you take something else from George Spencer Brown, and that's totally all right. But the whole point of science is to solve a problem and to find some agreement to solve an urgent problem. So I'm not saying that there is...
Jamie, the word science is from scientia, which is Latin for knowledge. We in our modern world restrict the scope of that term to methods, hypotheses, testing, experiment, public consensus, and all that stuff. If you go back just to the idea of scientia, there is personal scientia. We may seek personal scientia in many, many ways. What's his name? Not Gurdjieff, the other one. He wrote the book. He went on He went in search of the miraculous. I've forgotten his name. He was one of the a disciple of Gurdjieff. Uspensky. Uspensky's second book was called In Search of the Miraculous. He went out there to find and examine and look at the miraculous. And by definition, the miraculous does not exist in modern Western science. So I'm just, these are distinctions that we can make or break as we choose. Some people believe in miracles, some people don't.
We're running out of time. Paul, would you like to give us a concluding remark? A lot of things going on in your mind now.
Well, you're very kind to offer, but I don't want to get in the middle of the crossfire. I thought that Bernard has vindicated himself wonderfully in the context of the session overall. I'm still here. My brain stops working usually after about 60 minutes of Zoom pixelation. But the group is so interesting and the topic's interesting. I've been anxious to stay. However, I've already postponed one meeting scheduled with Shantanu, which will take up an hour from now or so. No, I can't parse or add. I think it's a valuable conversation. I appreciate so much Bernard's book, which I think is potent and now the thing to give out. And all the rest is conversation, and I think that's the way it can be.
Jamie, to be continued.